Die now, punk! Victor Castellano grabbed the new inmate by the throat and slammed him against the chain-link fence. His gold rings cut into flesh. His eyes held nothing but cruel anticipation. 3 days I starved those dogs for you, Castellano whispered. 3 days of howling. 3 days of suffering, all because you couldn't learn your place. He nodded to his men. They dragged the inmate toward the canine pen. Inside, 3 massive shapes paced through darkness, starving, savage, teeth flashing white against black fur. Open it, Castellano ordered. The gate shrieked open, hands shoved. A body hit concrete. The gate slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The dogs emerged from shadows. 90 pounds of muscle and hunger. They advanced on their prey. But the inmate didn't scream, didn't run, didn't beg. He raised one hand and spoke a single word. Down. The lead dog froze mid-attack. Because the man they'd just thrown to the wolves wasn't prey. He was their handler. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will make this prison rethink who the real animals are. 72 hours earlier, the transport van crossed into Montana, carrying a man the system had already forgotten. Ethan Cole sat in shackles watching frozen wilderness pass through reinforced windows. The 2 marshals escorting him had stopped talking hours ago. His file sat open on the seat between them, pages filled with contradictions nobody had bothered to question. 12 years Marine Corps, decorated canine handler, 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations. Then a sudden conviction. Theft of military equipment. Life sentence. The math didn't add up. But math rarely mattered. Admin mattered in a system designed to process bodies, not people. End of the line, Cole. The older marshal unlocked his shackles as the van stopped. His partner kept one hand on his weapon, watching Ethan like he might explode at any moment. Blackwater Federal Correctional, Sire, the marshal continued. Word of advice, keep your head down. This place has a reputation. What kind of reputation? Huh? The marshals exchanged glances. The kind where inmates go missing and nobody asks questions. They handed him off to facility guards who handled him like cargo. Strip search. Medical exam that lasted 4 minutes. Psychological evaluation conducted by a man who smelled like bourbon and regret. Any history of mental illness? No. Suicidal thoughts? No. Gang affiliations? No. The evaluator stamped his file without looking up. Welcome to Blackwater. Try not to die. Cell 47 in Block C measured 6 feet by 8 feet. Concrete walls, metal bunk, steel toilet, a window the size of a dinner plate showing nothing but gray skull. Ethan sat on the bunk and closed his eye. He thought about the dogs. Always the dogs. Titan, Ghost, Shadow. 3 partners he'd raised from 8-week-old puppies. Trained through 18 months of military working dog school. Deployed with through the worst hellholes Afghanistan and Iraq could offer. When they'd convicted him, the military had taken everything. His rank, his pension, his freedom, his future. But worst of all, they'd taken his dogs. He'd spent 3 years searching, filing requests through military channels, writing letters to every canine program in the country, hiring lawyers who took his money and delivered nothing. The answers were always the same. Classified. Unavailable. Not your concern anymore. 3 years of nothing. 3 years of wondering if they were alive. The cell door crashed open. Cole Ethan, cafeteria, 5 minutes, move. The cafeteria operated on fear. Ethan understood this the moment he walked through the doors. The way inmates clustered in groups defined by race and affiliation. The way guards stood along walls with expressions that said they'd had seen everything and cared about nothing. The way conversations died in waves as he passed 500 pairs of eyes measuring the new fish. He took his tray, found an empty table near the back wall, started eating. 3 bites in the shadow fell. You're in my seat. The man standing over him looked like a nightmare given flesh. 6'4", 260 neck tattoos crawling toward a shaved skull. Gold teeth caught fluorescent light when he smiled. 2 soldiers flanked him. Enforcers with dead eyes and scarred knuckles. Didn't see a name on it, Ethan replied. The smile disappeared. Let me explain something, Fish. My name is Marcus Thompson. I work for the man who runs this place. And when I tell you you're in my seat, you apologize, you move, and you thank me for not breaking your face. The cafeteria had gone silent, Every eye watching, every ear listening. "I'm still eating," Ethan said. "When I'm done, you can have it." Thompson's jaw tightened. His hands flexed at his sides. "You got a death wish that what this is. I've got eggs getting cold. That's what this is." One of Thompson's enforcers stepped forward. "Boss, let me teach this fool some manners." "Not here." Thompson held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Not yet." He leaned down until his breath hit Ethan's cheek. Tobacco and violence. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Fish, and you're going to have plenty of time to regret it. In pieces." He straightened up. "Enjoy your meal. It might be your last." They walked away. The cafeteria resumed breathing, but differently now. Charged. Electric. At the next table, an old man with white hair watched Ethan with eyes that had seen too much. "You know what you just did, son?" Ethan kept eating. "Made an enemy. You painted a target on your back the size of Texas." "Typhoon." The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. "Name's Walter Johnson. Everyone calls me Preacher. And I'm telling you right now, you need to find a way to fix what just happened. How do you fix men like that? You don't. You survive them, or you don't survive at all. What's Thompson's play? What's he going to do?" Preacher hesitated. His weathered hands trembled slightly on the table. "There's a canine unit here. 3 dogs. Military dogs, they say, though nobody knows where they came from. Castellano, the man who really runs this prison, he keeps them starved. Keeps them mean." Ethan's fork stopped moving. "When someone needs to disappear," Preacher continued, "they end up in that pen. Last man they threw in there, we found pieces of him for a week, scattered across the concrete like confetti." "The dogs' names, what are they?" Preacher frowned at the strange question. "Why would that matter?" "It matters. What are their names?" "Guard calls the big one Titan. Other 2 are Ghost and Shadow. But son, those aren't pets. They're killers. They don't have names that mean anything anymore." Ethan's face had changed. Something had shifted behind his eyes. Something that looked like recognition, like pain, like hope twisted into something sharper. "Titan," he breathed. "Ghost, Shadow. You know something. What do you know?" Ethan stood abruptly, his tray abandoned. "Where's the canine facility?" "Far corner of the yard, but you can't get near it. Guards patrol constantly. Cameras everywhere. I need to see them." "See them?" "Son, are you listening? Those dogs will tear you apart. They tear everyone apart." "Not everyone." Ethan walked away, leaving Preacher staring after him with confusion written across his face. The canine facility sat behind 3 layers of fencing separated from the main prison by 50 yards of open ground. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, as close as the guards would allow, and listened. Howling. Not the aggressive bark of attack dogs. Something else. Something broken. Hungry. Desperate. He knew that sound. He'd heard it in shelters where neglected animals waited for rescue that never came. In war zones where military dogs were abandoned by units that didn't make it back. In the nightmares that had followed him since his conviction dreams where his dogs called out for him and he couldn't reach them. It was the sound of loyalty being tortured into madness. "Titan," he whispered, "I'm here, boy. I found you." "You lost Fish." Thompson had appeared behind him with 2 of his men. Ethan turned slowly. "Just walking?" "Walking toward the dog pen. That's interesting." Thompson's gold teeth flashed. "Most inmates walk the other direction, fast as their legs will carry them." "I like dogs." Thompson laughed. The sound was ugly cruel. "You like dogs? That's rich. Let me tell you about these dogs, Fish. They haven't been fed properly in months. Castellano keeps them hungry because hungry dogs are mean dogs. Desperate dogs. Dogs that'll tear apart anything with a pulse." "Sounds like animal abuse." "Sounds like motivation." Thompson stepped closer. "And sounds like maybe you should spend less time worrying about animals and more time worrying about yourself." "Is that a threat?" "That's a promise." Thompson smiled wider. "Boss wants to meet you, tonight, after lights out. Time you learned how things really work around here. And if I'm not interested in meeting him, that's the thing about Castellano's invitations, Fish. Declining isn't an option." He walked away laughing, his men following like shadows. Ethan turned back toward the canine facility. Through the fences, through the walls, he could still hear them. His dogs, calling out, waiting. The message came at dinner. A folded paper slipped onto his tray by an inmate who passed without making eye contact. Ethan palmed it, finished his meal, and didn't read it until he was locked in his cell. "Midnight. Maintenance room B, come alone." No signature, none needed. Ethan sat on his bunk and considered his options. He could go voluntarily and face whatever Castellano had planned. He could refuse and wait for them to drag him there anyway. He could try to alert guards who were probably already paid to look the other way. None of the options were good. At 11:47, his cell door clicked open. Not a guard. The lock had been picked by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A figure stood in shadowed corridor, gesturing for him to follow. They walked through empty hallways where cameras should have been watching, but seemed conveniently pointed elsewhere, through doors that should have been locked but swung open without resistance, through a prison that belonged to someone other than the government. The maintenance room had been transformed. Chairs arranged in a semicircle. Men standing along walls with weapons poorly concealed. And at the center, seated like a king holding court, Victor Castellano. He was smaller than Ethan expected. Lean, well-groomed silver hair slicked back with precision. His suit was tailored absurd in a prison setting, a statement of power that transcended institutional rules. But his eyes held nothing human. The famous new fish. Castellano's voice was soft, almost pleasant, with traces of an accent that decades in America hadn't erased. I've been hearing interesting things about you. Ethan stood in the center of the semicircle, surrounded by enemies, and said nothing. Military man, canine handler, combat veteran, decorated, respected. Castellano listed the facts like items on a menu. And then somehow, mysteriously, you end up here. Convicted of theft, life sentence. Strange, isn't it? The punishment seems disproportionate to the crime. I didn't come here to discuss my case. No, you came here because I told you to come. Castellano's pleasantness didn't waver. And that's the first lesson, Mr. Cole. In this place, my word is the only word that matters. Wardens come and go, guards follow orders, inmates learn their place, and I decide everything. What do you want from me? Straight to business, I appreciate efficiency. Castellano stood, moving with fluid grace. What I want is simple. Tribute, loyalty, obedience. Every man in this facility provides these things one way or another. The question is how you choose to provide them. And if I choose not to provide them at all, Castellano smiled. The expression held no warmth. Then you meet my dogs. The words dropped like stones into still water. I've heard about your dogs, Ethan said. His voice remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. 3 of them, military working dogs, I'm told. Belgian Malinois, acquired through channels that don't appear on any official paperwork. Schedules. Castellano's smile widened. They've proven remarkably useful for maintaining discipline. Very motivating for those who forget their obligations. Where did they come from? The question seemed to catch Castellano off guard. His head tilted slightly curious. Why would that matter to you? Professional curiosity. I worked with military dogs for 12 years. I'm wondering how 3 Belgian Malinois ended up in a Montana prison being used as execution tools. They were acquired. That's all you need to know. Acquired from who? Through what channels? Military working dogs don't just disappear from the system. They have serial numbers, training records, handler assignments. Someone had to steal them, forge paperwork, move them across state lines. Castellano's smile had faded. Thompson shifted uncomfortably against the wall. You ask a lot of questions for a man in your position. I ask questions because I know what those dogs are worth. A fully trained Belgian Malinois with military service history represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in training investment. They're federal property. Taking them is a federal crime. Are you threatening me, Mr. Cole? I'm stating facts. Those dogs didn't appear from nowhere. Someone took them. Someone brought them here. Someone is responsible for what's been done to them. Castellano moved closer until he stood directly in front of Ethan. Up close, the coldness in his eyes was even more pronounced, the eyes of a man who'd killed many times and felt nothing. Let me explain something to you, Castellano said softly. I've been running this prison for 11 years. 11 years of absolute control. Inmates who challenged me are dead. Guards who questioned me are gone. The last warden who tried to interfere had an unfortunate accident while fishing. He leaned closer. And you think you can walk in here, ask questions about my dogs, and somehow change anything? You're not a threat, Mr. Cole. You're entertainment. Those dogs were mine. The words came out before Ethan could stop them. Raw, honest, carrying 3 years of pain and rage and desperate hope. Castellano blinked. For the first time, something like genuine surprise crossed his face. Yours? Titan, ghost, shadow. I raised them from puppies, trained them for 18 months, deployed with them through 3 combat tours. They're not just military working dogs. They're my partners, my family. The room had gone very quiet. And you brought them here, Ethan continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You starved them, beat them, turned them into monsters, used them to murder men who couldn't fight back. Thompson stepped forward. Boss, you want me to shut him up? Castellano raised a hand, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. This is fascinating, truly fascinating. He began to circle Ethan slowly. You're telling me that the dogs I've been using to eliminate problems for 11 years belong to you, that you trained them. I'm telling you that I spent 12 years building bonds with military working dogs, that I know their psychology better than anyone in this room, that Titan Ghost and Shadow will respond to my voice, my commands, my scent even after 3 years of separation. And yet they've killed 9 men in that pen, 9 men who screamed and begged and died in pieces. Castellano stopped circling. Why would they spare you? Because they remember me, because training doesn't disappear, because the bond between a handler and his dogs is almost impossible to break even through starvation and abuse. Almost impossible, Castellano smiled again. I like that word, almost. It leaves room for failure. He nodded to Thompson. The punch came fast, professional. A liver shot that dropped Ethan to his knees, followed by a kick to the ribs that sent him sprawling across concrete. Here's what's going to happen, Castellano said, standing over him. Tomorrow night you're going to be thrown into that pen, and those dogs you claim to love so much are going to tear you apart while I watch. Ethan pushed himself up slowly. Blood trickled from his lip. And if they don't, if they recognize me, if they obey my commands, then I'll have learned something valuable about my dogs, but you won't live to appreciate the knowledge. Castellano gestured to his men. Get him out of my sight. They dragged Ethan back to his cell and threw him inside. The door slammed shut with metallic finality. He lay on the concrete floor cataloging his injuries. Cracked rib, probably 2, bruised kidney, split lip, nothing fatal. He'd survived worse. In Afghanistan, an IED had thrown him 30 feet and buried him under rubble for 6 hours. In Iraq, a sniper's bullet had missed his head by inches. In Syria, his convoy had been ambushed and he'd fought hand-to-hand for survival while Titan tore through enemies beside him. He'd survived all of it. He would survive this too. Or he would die trying. Morning came with the shriek of alarms. Ethan was already awake, had never really slept his mind running calculations that had continued through the night. The canine facility layout, guard rotation patterns, distance from the pen to the nearest exit, weight and likely physical condition of each dog based on what he'd glimpsed through the fencing. Most importantly, he thought about the dogs themselves. 3 years of separation. Months of starvation and abuse. The trauma would be severe. Their training might be buried under layers of pain and survival instinct, but training was training. It was encoded in muscle memory and neural pathways strengthened by thousands of repetitions. A military working dog didn't forget its handler any more than a soldier forgot how to shoot. The question was whether they would remember fast enough. You look like hell, son. Preacher appeared beside him in the breakfast line. The old man's face was creased with concern. Feel like hell, too. Heard they took you to see Castellano last night. Heard it didn't go well. News travels fast. In here, news travels at light speed. Preacher lowered his voice. Word is you're scheduled for the pen tonight. Word is Castellano's already taking bets on how long you'll last. What's the over-under? 30 seconds for the screaming to start. 1 minute before you stop moving. Preacher shook his head slowly. Son, nobody survives that pen. Nobody. There's a first time for everything. This ain't a joke. This ain't bravado. Those dogs will kill you. I've seen what's left of men after they're done. Pieces, son. Pieces scattered across concrete like they went through a wood chipper. Ethan took his tray and moved toward his table. Preacher followed, unwilling to let the conversation end. Why aren't you scared? Why aren't you trying to find a way out? Because there is no way out, and because I'm not planning to die. Then what are you planning? Ethan sat down and looked at the old man directly. Those dogs were mine, Preacher. I raised them, trained them, loved them, and for 3 years I've been searching for them, wondering if they were alive, if they remembered me, if I'd ever see them again. Yours? What do you mean, yours? I mean, I was their handler, their partner, the person they trusted more than anyone in the world. Ethan's voice carried a weight that silenced Preacher's objections. Castellano thinks he's feeding me to monsters, but he doesn't understand what he has. He doesn't know that those dogs will recognize my voice, my commands, my scent. Tenin. After 3 years, after what they've been through, training doesn't disappear, and the bond between a handler and his dogs doesn't break just because someone starves them. Preacher stared at him for a long moment. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, he said finally, or the craziest. Probably both. The day passed in strange, slow motion. Ethan moved through his assigned duties with mechanical precision. Machine shop in the morning where he repaired industrial equipment with hands that remembered more than anyone suspected. Yard time in the afternoon, where he positioned himself as close to the canine facility as possible. He could hear them through the walls. The howling had changed since yesterday. Still desperate, still pained, but with a different note underneath. Uncertainty, confusion, as if they could sense something shifting. He began to hum. Quietly, barely audible, a tune that had no particular melody. The same sound he'd made thousands of times during training sessions, during deployments, during quiet moments in the desert when being near his dogs was the only thing keeping him sane. Through the walls of the canine facility, something responded. The howling stuttered, paused, changed pitch. Recognition. Maybe. What are you doing? A guard had approached. Young, nervous hand resting on his baton. Nothing, just standing. You're making noise, stop it. I was humming, is that against the rules? The guard's eyes darted toward the canine facility. Those dogs don't need agitation. They're dangerous enough already. Who takes care of them? Who feeds them? That's not your concern. It's a simple question. Someone has to feed them. Someone has to clean the pen. Who does it? The guard's nervousness increased. I said that's not your concern. Move along. When was the last time they were fed properly? When was the last time they saw a veterinarian? Move along now or I'll write you up. Ethan held the guard's gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. But he'd learned what he needed. The guard was scared of the dogs. Scared enough that he probably wasn't involved in their care, which meant someone else was responsible. Someone on Castellano's payroll. You're asking questions again. Thompson materialized beside him as he walked the yard's perimeter. The enforcer's gold teeth caught afternoon light. Is that a crime? Depends on the questions. Thompson fell into step beside him. Guards are talking about you, saying you were humming near the dog pen, saying the dogs reacted. Dogs react to sounds. It's what they do. Not these dogs. These dogs react to blood, to fear, to the smell of prey. Thompson studied Ethan's face. But they reacted to your humming like they recognized it, like they were listening for something. Maybe they were. Castellano's curious about you. He's never seen anyone face the pen without breaking first. You're not begging, not crying, not trying to bargain your way out. Would bargaining help us? No, but people try anyway. Human nature. They walked in silence for several paces. You really trained those dogs? Thompson asked finally. 12 years of military working dog handling. 3 combat deployments with K9 units. Yeah, I trained dogs, including those 3 specifically. How's that possible? How'd they end up here? Someone stole them from the military, forged transfer papers, sold them to Castellano through whatever channels he uses for his other illegal acquisitions. Thompson stopped walking. You're saying those dogs are federal property. I'm saying those dogs are military veterans with service records longer than most soldiers. I'm saying someone committed multiple federal crimes to acquire them. And I'm saying Castellano probably doesn't know what kind of liability he's sitting on. Why are you telling me this? Because when everything falls apart, and it will fall apart, you'll have to decide which side you're on. The side that tortured military working dogs for entertainment, or the side that stopped it. Thompson's expression had shifted, something uncertain flickering behind the enforcer's eyes. You think you can change things. You think one man can take down what Castellano's built. I think those dogs are going to remember their handler. I think what happens in that pen tonight isn't going to be what Castellano expects. And I think everyone watching is going to have to decide what they believe. Ethan walked away. Behind him, Thompson stood frozen, processing information that had just made his entire world more complicated. The sun set over Montana mountains in shades of blood and gold. In his cell, Ethan sat on his bunk and waited for midnight. The facility settled into its nighttime rhythm around him, doors locking, lights dimming, conversations fading into silence. He thought about Maria. His sister hadn't written in 2 years. She'd believed the conviction, believed the evidence, believed the prosecutors who painted him as a thief and a disgrace. He couldn't blame her. The frame-up had been professional, thorough, convincing. Colonel Thomas Reeves had made sure of that. Reeves had been running the theft ring for years, siphoning military equipment through private contractors and pocketing millions. Ethan had stumbled onto the operation by accident, had gathered evidence, had prepared to report it through proper channels, and Reeves had destroyed him, fabricated evidence, paid witnesses, a rushed court-martial that convicted an innocent man while the real criminal received commendation for his service. 3 years of fighting from inside prison, every appeal denied, every request for review rejected, every letter to authorities ignored. 3 years of watching hope die slowly. But if he survived tonight, everything would change. Federal investigators would have to look at Castellano's operation. They'd find the dogs, find the falsified transfer records, find the trail that led back to whoever had stolen them for military custody, and that trail might lead to Reeves. The cell door clicked open at midnight. Thompson stood in the corridor with 6 men. More than last night, Castellano wasn't taking chances. "Time to go, Cole." Ethan stood without resistance. They cuffed his hands and marched him through empty hallways, through doors that shouldn't have opened, but did, through a prison that belonged to a man who believed himself untouchable. The night air hit like a blade. Cold Montana wind cutting through thin prison uniform. The canine facility loomed ahead. Howling echoed from inside. Louder now, more frantic. The dogs knew something was coming. Thompson walked beside him, unusually quiet. "You scared?" Ethan asked. "Scared of what?" "Of what's about to happen. Of what you're about to witness." Thompson didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "I've seen 9 men thrown in that pen. 9 men who begged and screamed and died in pieces." He paused. "But none of them walked in like you're walking in. None of them looked like they were heading to a family reunion instead of an execution. Maybe that's because none of them were." They reached the facility entrance. Inside, the smell hit immediately. Animal waste, unwashed fur, hunger made physical, and the sounds, growling, low, constant, building towards something explosive. The corridor led to the main pen. Through reinforced glass, Ethan saw them for the first time in 3 years. Titan stood in the center, still massive, still commanding, but gaunt now. Ribs showing through dull fur. Scars covering his muzzle from abuse he shouldn't have survived. Ghost and Shadow flanked him. Smaller, faster, their eyes reflecting dim light like twin fires burning in skulls. They saw the humans approach. The growling intensified. Castellano was waiting by the control panel. His tailored suit looked absurd in this setting. His smile looked worse. "Mr. Cole, ready for your lesson?" Ethan said nothing. "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About those dogs being yours. About training that doesn't disappear." Castellano's smile widened. "I decided to test your theory. I haven't fed them in 4 days now. 4 days of nothing but water. They're hungrier than they've ever been. That's the test. Starve them until they're desperate enough to attack anything. That's the test. Let's see if your precious bond survives genuine desperation." The inner gate began to slide open. "Any last words? Real ones this time." Ethan looked through the glass at his dogs. At Titan, who was staring back with eyes that held nothing but hunger and rage. At Ghost and Shadow, their muscles coiled for attack. 4 days without food. 4 days of suffering designed specifically to break whatever recognition might have survived. Castellano had stacked the deck as heavily as possible, but he'd missed something important. He'd missed the fact that military working dogs were trained to operate under exactly these conditions. Hunger, exhaustion, chaos, confusion. The training accounted for all of it, and the training always held. "One word," Ethan said. "I've got one word." Thompson's men shoved him through the gate. His feet hit concrete. The gate slammed shut behind him. For one heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Titan lunged. 90 pounds of starving military dog launched across the pen. 4 days of hunger driving him forward, teeth bared, claws extended, closing the distance in a blur that most humans couldn't have tracked. Behind him, Ghost and Shadow followed, 3 apex predators converging on prey that had nowhere to run. Ethan planted his feet, drew a breath from somewhere deeper than his lungs, and spoke. "Titan, halt!" The command exploded through the facility. It carried 12 years of training, thousands of hours of practice. The absolute authority of a handler who had never given an order he didn't mean. Titan's front paws hit concrete. His body seized mid-attack. Momentum carried him forward even as conflicting instincts screamed through his brain. Attack, obey, kill, submit, hunger, loyalty. He stopped 3 feet from Ethan's throat. Behind the glass, Castellano's smile vanished. "Ghost, Shadow, down." The other two dogs hit the ground. Their growls faded to confused whimpers as training overrode starvation as memory overrode trauma. Ethan lowered himself to his knees. Slowly, carefully, showing no fear. "Hey, boy," he said softly, looking directly into Titan's eyes. "It's me, it's Dad. I found you. I finally found you." Titan's massive head tilted. His nostrils flared, processing scent information that his brain had stored years ago. Beneath the prison smells, beneath the hunger, something else emerged. The handler. His handler. A sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a bark, a whimper. Recognition. Joy. 3 years of separation. 4 days of starvation. Months of abuse and trauma and suffering. None of it mattered. The bond held. Titan pressed his head into Ethan's hand. His tail moved. Once. Twice. Then faster, harder, the full-body wag of a dog reunited with the person he loved most. Ghost crept forward. Then Shadow. Within seconds, Ethan was surrounded by his dogs. Not as predators, as partners, as family. He wrapped his arms around Titan's neck and buried his face in matted fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry they took you. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through." Titan whimpered again, pressing closer. Behind the glass, Castellano's face had gone white. His men were backing away from the observation window. Thompson stood frozen, staring at a scene that defied everything he understood about power and control. The execution had become a reunion, and nothing in Blackwater Federal Correctional would ever be the same. The silence lasted exactly 7 seconds. Ethan counted them while his arms wrapped around Titan's neck, while Ghost pressed against his left side, while Shadow positioned herself between her handler and the men behind the glass. 7 seconds of absolute stillness. Then Castellano's voice cracked through the speaker system. "Open the gate. Get him out of there, now." Nobody moved. Thompson's men stood frozen, staring at a scene that violated every law of nature they understood. The dogs were supposed to kill. The dogs always killed. 9 men had died in that pen torn apart while Castellano watched and laughed. But the dogs weren't killing. They were protecting. "I said open the gate." Castellano's composure had shattered. His voice carried a pitch of fear that his men had never heard before. "Thompson, get your people moving." Thompson stepped toward the control panel, then stopped. Titan had risen to his feet. The massive dog stood between Ethan and the gate, his scarred muzzle pulled back to reveal teeth that gleamed in the dim light. Ghost and Shadow flanked their alpha, forming a wall of muscle and fury. They weren't growling at Ethan anymore. They were growling at everyone else. "Boss," Thompson said slowly, "if we open that gate, those dogs are coming through it. They're animals. They follow commands. They're following commands right now. His commands." Ethan stood up slowly, one hand resting on Titan's head. He looked through the reinforced glass at Castellano's face, at the fear that had replaced arrogance, at the understanding that was beginning to dawn. "You wanted a lesson," Ethan said, his voice carrying through the speaker that connected the pen to the observation area. "Here it is. These dogs don't belong to you. They never belonged to you. You've been using borrowed weapons, Castellano, and the owner just showed up to collect." Castellano's face contorted. He grabbed the nearest guard, a young man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. "You, get in there! Get him out!" The guard's eyes went wide. "Sir, those dogs will—" "I don't care what those dogs will do. Get in there! I'm not going in there! Nobody's going in there!" Castellano shoved the guard away. He turned to Thompson, to the enforcers who had served him loyally for years, who had disposed of bodies and broken bones, and maintained his empire of fear. None of them moved. "This is insubordination," Castellano hissed. "This is betrayal. When I get out of here, every single one of you—" "When you get out of here," Ethan interrupted. "You think you're getting out of here?" He walked toward the gate, his dogs moving with him in perfect formation. Military precision. Combat readiness. The instincts they'd developed through 3 tours in the most dangerous places on Earth. "Open the gate," Ethan said. Thompson's hand moved toward the control panel. "Don't you dare," Castellano screamed. "Thompson, I swear to God, if you open that gate—" "Open it," Ethan repeated, "or I'll have Titan open it for me. He's very good at breaking things." The massive dog's growl deepened as if he understood the threat and was eager to demonstrate. Thompson punched in the code. The gate slid open. Ethan walked through with his dogs beside him. Ghost and Shadow fanned out covering angles, watching for threats. Titan stayed at his handler's side, close enough that his shoulder brushed Ethan's leg with every step. Castellano backed away until he hit the wall. "Stay away from me. I'm warning you, stay away." "You're warning me," Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You kidnapped federal property. You tortured military veterans. You murdered 9 men using animals you didn't understand and couldn't control. And you're warning me. I have connections, lawyers, politicians, people who owe me favors. And I have 3 Belgian Malinois who remember every person who ever hurt them." Ethan stopped walking, his dog stopping with him. "Sit." Titan Ghost and Shadow sat in unison. Their eyes remained locked on Castellano. These dogs spent 3 years in combat zones. They've tracked terrorists through mountain caves. They've detected explosives that would have killed hundreds of soldiers. They've taken down armed combatants who thought they were untouchable. Ethan's voice dropped lower. "And for the past 11 years, you've been starving them, beating them, using them to murder innocent men for your entertainment." "I didn't know," Castellano said quickly. "I didn't know they were military dogs. I was told they were rejects, failures, animals nobody wanted." "So you tortured them because you thought nobody cared," Ethan shook his head. "That makes it worse, not better." He turned to Thompson, who stood by the control panel with an expression that wavered between fear and something that might have been relief. "You're making a choice right now. Everyone in this room is making a choice. You can stand with Castellano and go down with him when this falls apart. Or you can stand back and let justice happen." "What kind of justice?" Thompson asked. "The federal kind. Military working dogs are government property. Stealing them is theft of federal assets. Transporting them across state lines is trafficking. Using them to kill people is murder with a deadly weapon." Ethan looked around the room at the guards, the enforcers, the men who had enabled Castellano's reign of terror. "Everyone who participated in this is going down. The question is how far down? Cooperation might make a difference. Continued resistance definitely won't." One of the younger guards raised his hands. "I never touched those dogs. I just worked the night shift. I didn't even know what was happening here." "Then you've got nothing to worry about." Another guard followed suit, then another. Within 60 seconds, Castellano stood alone, his empire built over 11 years of violence and fear crumbling in real time. "Thompson," he said, his voice cracking. "Marcus, we've been together for 8 years. I made you. I gave you everything you have." Thompson didn't answer immediately. He looked at the dogs, at the man who commanded them, at the guards who had already surrendered. Then he looked at his hands. Hands that had broken bones for Castellano. Hands that had dragged men to their deaths. Hands covered in blood that would never wash clean. "You gave me a life I never wanted," Thompson said finally. "You made me into something I hate. And you're right, we've been together 8 years. Long enough for me to know exactly what kind of man you are." He stepped away from the control panel. "I'm done." Castellano's face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. None of you can do this. I own this prison. I own everyone in it." "Not anymore," Ethan said. The night that followed would be remembered at Blackwater Federal Correctional for years to come. Ethan secured Castellano in the K9 pen, the same pen where 9 men had died at his order. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. "The dogs won't hurt you," Ethan said through the reinforced glass. "I won't give them that command, but they'll watch you, all night, and every time you move, they'll remember what you did to them." Castellano sat in the corner of the pen, knees drawn to his chest, while 3 pairs of eyes tracked his every breath. Thompson proved more useful than expected. "The warden's been AWOL for 2 years, he explained as dawn approached. "Lives in Colorado, signs whatever Castellano tells him to sign. The whole administrative structure is rotten." "Who else is involved?" "Guards outside contractors. Everyone. Castellano's got fingers in every pie. The kitchen, the commissary, the medical unit. He controls what comes in and what goes out. Controls who lives and who dies." "Not anymore." Thompson hesitated. "What happens now, to me, to the others?" "That depends on what you do in the next few hours." Ethan looked at the enforcer directly. "You can help me document everything. Names, dates, transactions. Every crime Castellano committed and everyone who helped him commit it. Or you can stay quiet and take your chances with federal prosecutors." "And if I help?" "Then maybe someone mentions that you cooperated when the charges get filed. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe it doesn't." Ethan shrugged. "Either way, it's better than the alternative." Thompson made his decision quickly. "Castellano keeps records. Everything. He's paranoid enough to document every transaction, every payment, every body. There's a safe in his cell. I know the combination." "Show me." The safe contained 11 years of criminal empire carefully organized and meticulously maintained. Financial records showing payments to guards, officials, contractors. Photographs of men who'd crossed Castellano, some before their deaths, some after. Communications with outside networks, drug smugglers, weapons dealers, people who operated in shadows that never touched legitimate society. And most importantly, documentation about the dogs. Transfer papers forged but professional showing the dogs had been legally acquired from a defunct canine training facility in Nevada. Payment records to an intermediary named Harding, who specialized in acquiring military assets through channels that bypassed official oversight. The trail led somewhere. Ethan intended to follow it. "This Harding," he said, studying the documents. "Where is he now?" "Dead." Thompson shook his head. "Castellano doesn't leave loose ends. Harding disappeared about 3 years ago. Body was never found. But someone above Harding arranged the original theft. Someone with military access. Someone who knew which dogs to target and how to make them disappear from the system. Castellano never mentioned names. He just said the dogs came from someone who owed him a favor. Someone powerful. Someone powerful. Someone with military access. Someone who needed 3 specific dogs to disappear. Ethan thought about Colonel Thomas Reeves. About the timing of everything. His conviction had happened 6 months before the dogs were transferred. Reeves had been in charge of the canine program during that period. It wasn't proof, but it was a connection. By noon, the first outside authorities arrived. A state police captain named Rodriguez, responding to an emergency call from a guard whose conscience had finally broken through years of complicity. Rodriguez took one look at the situation at Castellano, still sitting in the canine pen surrounded by dogs who growled every time he moved at the stacks of evidence documenting 11 years of criminal enterprise, and called for reinforcements. "This is going federal," he said to Ethan. "Way above my pay grade, but I can tell you right now, whatever immunity deal you're hoping for, you've got a strong case." "I'm not looking for immunity, I'm looking for justice." "For what?" Ethan pointed toward the canine pen. "For them. They were stolen from military service, trafficked across state lines, used as murder weapons for over a decade. Someone's responsible for all of it, and that someone isn't rotting in a Montana prison." Rodriguez studied him carefully. "You're the handler. The one who trained them. I'm the one who lost them. 3 years ago, when I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit, someone took my dogs while I was fighting for my life in a courtroom. Someone made sure I'd never find them." "And you think these things are connected, your conviction and the dogs?" "I think too many coincidences stop being coincidences." The federal response arrived at 3:47 p.m. FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, representatives from the Department of Defense Canine Program, a circus of jurisdiction and authority that descended on Blackwater like locusts. Agent Sarah Chen took lead on the investigation. 43 years old, 15 years with the Bureau, specialized in public corruption cases that crossed state lines. She'd seen a lot of strange situations in her career. This one made the top 5. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, sitting across from Ethan in an interview room that had been hastily cleared of Castellano's surveillance equipment. "You're claiming that the 3 dogs in that pen are military working dogs who were illegally transferred from DoD custody approximately 3 years ago." "I'm not claiming. I'm stating fact. Titan, Ghost, and Shadow served under my command through 3 combat deployments. Their service numbers are tattooed inside their ears. Their DNA is on file with the Military Canine Registry. Their training records exist in multiple databases. And you believe your own conviction is related to their disappearance." "I believe the timing is suspicious. I was convicted 6 months before the dogs were transferred. The officer who testified against me, Colonel Thomas Reeves, was in charge of the canine program during that period." Chen's expression remained neutral, professionally unreadable. "That's a serious accusation against a decorated military officer." "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm noting a connection. The investigation will determine what that connection means." "Fair enough." Chen made a note in her file. "Tell me about Castellano. Tell me about what happened last night." Ethan told her everything. The confrontation in the maintenance room, the beating, the threats, the midnight walk to the canine facility, the moment when he'd called out to dogs he hadn't seen in 3 years and they'd answered. "They recognized you," Chen said when he finished. "After 3 years of separation, after months of abuse and starvation, they still recognized you. Training holds, and the bond between a handler and his dogs isn't something that breaks easily." "Clearly not." She leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to be honest with you. What you've done here has opened up multiple federal investigations. Castellano's operation reaches further than this prison. The corruption, the trafficking, the murders. We're talking years of work to untangle everything. What about the dogs? What about them?" What happens to them? They're military veterans. They've suffered enough. They deserve proper care, proper treatment, a chance to recover from what's been done to them. Chen considered the question. That's above my authority. The DoD will have to make that determination. Then get me someone from the DoD who can make it. The DoD representative arrived the next morning. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes had spent 22 years in the Army, the last 7 overseeing the military working dog program. She knew Ethan by reputation, had followed his career. Before his conviction, had wondered what really happened when one of the best handlers in the program suddenly faced accusations that didn't fit anything she knew about him. "Staff Sergeant Cole," she said, using his former rank despite everything, "I've been wanting to meet you for 3 years. To discuss my conviction. To discuss the dogs. After you were imprisoned, your unit's K-9 assets were scheduled for reassignment. Standard procedure. But when the transfer orders came through, something went wrong." "What kind of wrong?" "The dogs never arrived at their destination. Paperwork showed them at a retirement facility in Virginia. But when we audited the facility last year, there was no record of them ever being there." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You knew they were missing." "We suspected something was wrong, but the paperwork was clean. The transfer authorizations came from proper channels. It looked legitimate. Until now." "Until now." Hayes' expression hardened. "Whoever did this had access. High-level access. They knew how to make military assets disappear without triggering automatic reviews. Someone like Colonel Thomas Reeves." Hayes didn't answer immediately. Her silence spoke volumes. "I can't comment on active investigations," she said finally, "but I can tell you that your conviction has been flagged for review. New evidence has come to light that suggests significant irregularities in the original prosecution." "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that gets people's attention in Washington. The kind that makes career prosecutors suddenly interested in cases they ignored for 3 years. Ethan absorbed this information slowly. 3 years of fighting for his name. 3 years of rejected appeals and ignored requests. And suddenly, because he'd found his dogs in a Montana prison, doors that had been locked were beginning to open. "What about Titan Ghost and Shadow?" Hayes smiled for the first time. "The Defense Department is reclaiming custody of all 3 animals. They'll be transferred to a proper rehabilitation facility where they can receive appropriate care. And after rehabilitation, that depends on several factors. Their age, their health, their psychological condition." She paused. "It also depends on whether a suitable handler is available." "I'm available." "You're currently incarcerated." "That might be changing." Hayes nodded slowly. "It might, and if it does, if your conviction is overturned and you're released, the program would be very interested in discussing the dog's future placement." For the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something that might have been hope. The media arrived on day 4. Someone had leaked the story to a reporter in Billings, who'd called a contact in Helena, who'd reached out to a network correspondent in Seattle. Within 12 hours, "Prison Dogs Reunite with Handler" was trending across every social platform. The narrative was irresistible. Military veteran, wrongful conviction, dog stolen and tortured, reunion against impossible odds. Camera crews camped outside Blackwater's gates. Talking heads debated the story on morning shows. Politicians who'd never heard of Ethan Cole suddenly expressed deep concern about military working dog welfare. Inside the prison, everything had changed. Castellano's people had scattered. Some cooperated with investigators, trading information for reduced charges. Others lawyered up and refused to speak. A few tried to run and were caught within hours. The warden was arrested at his fishing cabin in Colorado, confused and protesting that he had no idea what had been happening at his facility. And Ethan Cole found himself at the center of a storm he'd never anticipated. "You've become a symbol," Preacher said during one of their conversations in the yard. "People see you and they see hope. They see proof that good can win, that evil can be defeated, that even the strongest walls can fall." "I'm not a symbol. I'm just a man who wanted his dogs back." "That's what makes it work. You're not trying to be anything. You're just being yourself." The old man smiled. "That's the most powerful thing in the world." Ethan watched his dogs through the fence of the temporary enclosure that had been set up for them. Proper food, clean water, the veterinary care. They were already looking better, moving with more energy, their eyes brighter than they'd been since the reunion. Titan saw him watching and pressed against the fence, his tail wagging. "Soon, boy," Ethan said softly. "We're going home soon." The Department of Justice announced its investigation on day 8. Multiple targets, multiple jurisdictions. A coordinated effort to untangle the corruption that had allowed Castellano to operate with impunity for over a decade, and buried in the announcement a single sentence that changed everything. In connection with this investigation, the department is also reviewing the conviction of Ethan Cole, whose case has raised significant concerns about prosecutorial misconduct and falsified evidence. Agent Chen delivered the news personally. The colonel is under investigation. Reeves. We can't prove he was directly involved in the dog trafficking yet, but the financial records show payments to intermediaries who were connected to his office. What about my conviction? The evidence against you was manufactured. We can prove that now. The witnesses who testified were paid. The physical evidence was planted. She met his eyes. Someone wanted you destroyed, Mr. Cole. Someone with the power to make it happen. Reeves? Probably, but proving it in court takes time. Building a case that can't be dismissed takes resources. Chen paused. In the meantime, there's the question of your immediate status. What question? The federal prosecutor handling the Blackwater case wants to offer you a deal. Full immunity for your cooperation in testifying against Castellano and his network. Immediate release pending the review of your original conviction. Ethan stared at her. You're saying I could be out? I'm saying the paperwork is being drafted. Given the circumstances, given what you've done, given what we now know about your case, no one wants to keep you locked up while the system sorts itself out. When 72 hours, maybe less if the judge is feeling motivated. 72 hours. After 3 years, after everything. Ethan walked to the window and looked out at the Montana mountains. The same mountains that had promised death to anyone foolish enough to run. Now they promise something different. Freedom. There's one condition, Chen added. He turned back to face her. The dogs. When they're cleared for release from the rehabilitation facility, you'll need to formally request custody. The paperwork will be complicated. Military assets, civilian handler chain of custody issues. You're saying I can have them back. I'm saying you'll have to fight for them, but yes, if you want them, you can have them. Ethan thought about Titan pressing against his hand in that pen. About Ghost and Shadow, or responding to his voice after 3 years of silence. About the bond that nothing had managed to break. I want them. Then you'll have them. The sun was setting over Montana, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside his cell, Ethan sat on his bunk for what might be the last time. The walls that had confined him for months were about to disappear. The nightmare that had consumed 3 years of his life was finally ending. But he knew it wasn't over. Reeves was still out there, still free, still dangerous. The man who'd destroyed Ethan's life, who'd stolen his dogs, who'd condemned 3 military veterans to 11 years of torture and abuse. He was still breathing, still unpunished. Ethan closed his eyes and made a promise. To Titan, who'd protected him through the worst moments of war. To Ghost and Shadow, who'd never stopped being the partners he'd trained them to be. To himself, who'd spent 3 years in darkness waiting for light that finally arrived. This wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning. And Colonel Thomas Reeves was going to learn exactly what happened to people who hurt military working dogs. The gates of Blackwater Federal Correctional opened at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after Ethan Cole had walked into a canine pen expecting to die. He stepped through them, carrying nothing but a small plastic bag containing the clothes he'd arrived in, a Bible he'd never opened, and a single photograph of 3 dogs that had been taken during his last deployment. Agent Chen waited by a black SUV, her expression professional but carrying something that might have been respect. Mr. Cole, your transportation is ready. Where are we going? Helena First, Federal Courthouse. The judge wants to formalize your release and discuss the terms of your cooperation agreement. She opened the passenger door. Then we'll see about reuniting you with your dogs. Ethan climbed in. The SUV pulled away from Blackwater, and he watched through the window as the prison shrank in the distance. 14 days ago, he'd arrived in shackles, expecting to spend the rest of his life behind those walls. Now he was free. But freedom felt strange. Empty. Like wearing clothes that no longer fit. You're quiet, Chen observed. Processing. That's understandable. 3 years is a long time. 3 years is a lifetime. Ethan turned away from the window. What's the status on Reeves? Chen's expression tightened. The investigation is ongoing. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. Colonel Reeves is a decorated officer with 30 years of service. Investigating him requires evidence-proper channels approvals from people who don't like approving things. So he's still free? For now? And my dogs, but being transported to a rehabilitation facility in Wyoming. You'll be able to see them within the week. A week. 7 more days of separation after 3 years. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly. What do you need from me and Helena? Testimony, details, everything you know about Castellano's operation, his contacts, his methods. Chen glanced at him. The more you give us, the stronger the case becomes. And the stronger the case becomes, the more pressure we can put on everyone involved. Including Reeves. Including anyone the evidence points to. The federal courthouse in Helena was a monument to bureaucracy, all marble and flags and serious-faced officials moving through hallways with important documents. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over Ethan's hearing with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many cases and had too little patience for drama. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the circumstances of your release and the terms of your cooperation agreement. Do you understand that you are being released conditionally pending the outcome of multiple federal investigations? I understand, Your Honor. Do you understand that any violation of these terms will result in immediate reincarceration? I understand. Do you have any questions about your obligations under this agreement? Ethan hesitated. I have a question about the investigation into my original conviction. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. That matter is being handled by a separate division. I have no authority over those proceedings. I'm not asking for authority, Your Honor. I'm asking for information. When can I expect a formal ruling on whether my conviction will be overturned? That depends on factors beyond my control. The evidence review process, the prosecutor's timeline, the availability of witnesses. Morrison studied him over the rim of her glasses. But given what I've seen of your case, Mr. Cole, I would not expect to wait long. The irregularities are significant. How significant? Significant enough that several people in Washington are asking uncomfortable questions about how a decorated military handler ended up in prison for a crime that appears to have been manufactured from whole cloth. She leaned forward slightly. Someone wanted you destroyed, Mr. Cole, and when we find out who, there will be consequences. The hearing concluded at 11:47 a.m. Chen drove Ethan to a hotel on the outskirts of Helena, where a room had been reserved under a name that wasn't his. You'll stay here until we can arrange more permanent housing. Don't leave the city. Don't contact anyone from your past without clearing it with us first. Don't do anything that might compromise the investigation. I need to see my sister. Chen hesitated. Maria Cole. She's been notified of your release. And she didn't respond. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. 3 years of silence, and still Maria wanted nothing to do with him. Can you get me her address, her phone number? I can get you her contact information, but I can't make her talk to you. I know, I just need the chance to try. Chen handed him a folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Bozeman, a phone number, and a photograph of a woman who looked older than she should have. Maria, his baby sister, the person he'd spent his entire childhood protecting. She'd believed the lies, believed he was a thief, believed he'd thrown away everything their family had sacrificed to give him, and maybe he couldn't blame her. The evidence had been convincing. The trial had been thorough. Everyone involved had done their jobs professionally, efficiently, never realizing they were participating in a frame-up orchestrated by a man who needed a scapegoat. There's something else, Chen said. Ethan looked up from the photograph. Your dogs, the rehabilitation facility called this morning. They're ready for visitors earlier than expected. How early? Tomorrow. If you want, we can arrange transportation. Tomorrow. 14 hours. Ethan closed the folder and held it against his chest like a lifeline. I want. The drive to Wyoming took 6 hours. Ethan spent most of it staring out the window watching the landscape change from Montana mountains to Wyoming plains. Chen drove in silence, respecting his need for quiet. He thought about what came next. The investigation, the testimony, the slow grinding of federal justice as it worked its way toward conclusions that might take months or years to reach. And Reeves. Always Reeves. The colonel was out there somewhere, probably monitoring the news, probably calculating his next move. Men like Reeves didn't go down easily. They had contingencies, exit strategies. Years of accumulated favors they could call in when things got difficult. If Ethan wanted justice, he couldn't rely on the system alone. He needed leverage. Tell me about the paper trails, he said suddenly. Chen glanced at him. What paper trail? The one connecting Reeves to the dog trafficking. You said there were payments to intermediaries. Who received those payments? Where did the money come from? That's classified information, Mr. Cole. I'm cooperating with your investigation. Doesn't that entitle me to some transparency? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was lower than before. The payments went through a shell company called Patriot Asset Recovery. On paper, it's a legitimate business that handles surplus military equipment. In reality, it's a laundering operation that moves stolen goods through channels that never show up on official inventories. And Reeves is connected to this company. His brother-in-law is listed as a silent partner. We can't prove Reeves knew about the operation, but the circumstantial evidence is damning. What about the person who actually took the dogs, the one who forged the transfer documents? Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A sergeant named William Torres. He was stationed at the K-9 training facility where your dogs were being held. He's dead now. Suicide officially, but the timing was suspicious. Suspicious how? He died 3 days before federal investigators were scheduled to interview him. Gunshot wound to the head. No witnesses, no note. Ethan's jaw tightened. Reeves cleaned up his loose end. We can't prove that. But you believe it. Chen didn't answer. She didn't have to. The rehabilitation facility was called Mountain Haven Canine Recovery, and it sat on 40 acres of fenced Wyoming wilderness. A woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell met them at the entrance. Mid-50s gray-streaked hair, hands that had clearly spent decades working with animals. Mr. Cole, I've been expecting you. How are they? How are my dogs? Come with me. I'll show you. She led them through a series of corridors until they reached a large outdoor enclosure. And there, visible through a window of reinforced glass, Ethan saw them. Titan, Ghost, Shadow. They were running. Not the frantic, desperate pacing he'd witnessed at Blackwater, real running, joyful running. The kind of movement that said their bodies were healing their spirits, were recovering their trauma, was beginning to fade. Ethan pressed his hand against the glass. Titan saw him. The massive dog stopped mid-stride. His head turned. His ears perked forward, and then he was moving toward the glass with a speed that said nothing else in the world mattered. Ghost and Shadow followed their bodies, practically vibrating with recognition. They reached the window and pressed against it, whimpering, pawing at the barrier between them. They've been waiting for you, Dr. Mitchell said softly. Every day they watch the door. Every time someone new arrives, they look for your face. Can I go in? Of course. The door opened. Ethan stepped through. Titan hit him first, under 90 pounds of muscle and fur and desperate affection. Ghost came next. Then Shadow, all three of them pressing against him, licking his face, making sounds that were somewhere between whimpers and howls. Ethan dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around all of them. I'm here, he whispered. I'm here. I'm not leaving you again. Never again. He didn't know how long he stayed like that. Minutes, hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. The only thing that mattered was this moment, this reunion, this family finally together again. They've been through hell, Dr. Mitchell said after Ethan had collected himself enough to listen. Malnutrition, parasites, psychological trauma from years of abuse. But animals are resilient, Mr. Cole. More resilient than we give them credit for. Will they recover fully? Physically, yes. They're already showing significant improvement. Mentally, she paused. That depends on you. Dogs like these need structure, consistency, a handler they trust. They need to remember what it feels like to be safe. I can give them that. I believe you can. That's why I'm recommending immediate release into your custody. Ethan looked up sharply. I thought there would be bureaucratic delays, paperwork, approvals. There should be, but I've been in contact with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes from the DoD. She's expedited the process. Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. Apparently you made quite an impression on her. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. Ethan signed documents transferring custody of Titan, Ghost, and Shadow from military control to civilian ownership. He filed applications for the certifications he would need to work with them professionally. He made arrangements for temporary housing in Wyoming while the investigations in Montana continued. And he tried to call Maria 12 times. 12 times the phone rang and went to voicemail. 12 times he heard his sister's voice asking him to leave a message. 12 times he couldn't find the words. On the 13th call, someone answered. Stop calling me. Maria's voice was hard cold, nothing like the warmth he remembered. Maria, please, just listen. Listen to what more lies. More excuses. The conviction is being overturned. The evidence against me was fabricated. I didn't do what they said I did. Silence on the line. Then, you expect me to believe that I expect you to look at the news. It's everywhere. The federal investigation. The prison corruption case. My name is being cleared. Your name, Maria laughed bitterly. Your name was dragged through the mud 3 years ago. Our family name. Mom died thinking her son was a criminal. Did you know that? Did you know she stopped eating after your conviction? Stopped leaving the house." Ethan closed his eyes. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy feeling sorry for yourself in prison." "Maria? Don't say my name like we're still family. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't bring shame on everyone who ever loved them. I was framed. Someone set me up. Someone destroyed my life to cover their own crimes. And I'm supposed to believe that because you say so. Believe the federal investigation. Believe the evidence. Believe whatever you need to believe, but please, Maria, just give me a chance to explain." Another silence. Longer this time. "Where are you, Sumnerton, Wyoming? At a rehabilitation facility with my dogs." "Your dogs? The ones from the news?" "Yes, the ones that were stolen when I was convicted. The ones I spent 3 years searching for." Maria's voice softened slightly, just slightly. "I saw that story, the video of you in the pen, the way those dogs responded to you. They're my partners. They saved my life more times than I can count. And now you saved theirs. I had to. There was no other choice. Silence stretched between them, not the hostile silence of before, something more complicated. "There's a diner in Bozeman," Maria said finally. "On the corner of Main and 5th. I'll be there tomorrow at noon. If you want to talk, you can find me there." She hung up before he could respond. Ethan stood holding the phone, his heart pounding. Tomorrow. A chance. More than he'd dared to hope for. Maria was waiting when he arrived at the diner. She sat in a booth near the back, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her, her eyes fixed on the door. When she saw him, something flickered across her face. Not quite recognition, not quite welcome. Fear, maybe? Or hope? Or both? "You came?" she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "Did you think I wouldn't—" "I didn't know what to think. I haven't known what to think for 3 years." Ethan studied his sister's face. She was 34 now, only 7 years younger than him, but she looked older. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Gray streaking her dark hair. The past 3 years had aged them both. "I'm sorry, though," he said, "for what my conviction did to you, to Mom, to our family. Sorry doesn't fix anything. I know, but it's where I have to start." Maria wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Tell me what happened, from the beginning. Tell me everything." So he told her. About Colonel Reeves and the theft ring he'd discovered. About the evidence he'd gathered, the report he'd prepared to file. About waking up one morning to find military police at his door charging him with crimes he'd never committed. About the trial that had been over before it started, the witnesses who'd lied the evidence that had been manufactured with terrifying precision. About 3 years of appeals denied and requests ignored. About finding his dogs in a Montana prison being used as executioners by a man who didn't understand what he had. About the reunion that had changed everything. Maria listened without interrupting. Her expression shifted as he spoke, hardness giving way to uncertainty, uncertainty giving way to something that looked like dawning horror. "You're saying Reeves did all of this, framed you stole your dogs, covered it up for 3 years. I'm saying Reeves needed a scapegoat. I was convenient, and once I was out of the way, he could do whatever he wanted with my dogs without anyone asking questions. But why? Why your dogs specifically? Because they were valuable. Fully trained military working dogs with combat experience. They're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the black market, and Reeves had connections who could move them without leaving a trace." Maria shook her head slowly. "I believed them, the prosecutors, the witnesses. I believed everything they said about you. The evidence was convincing. Reeves made sure of that. But I should have known. You're my brother. I should have known you'd never do what they accused you of. You were grieving. You were watching our mother die. You didn't have the energy to question anything." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't blame you, Maria. I never blamed you." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I stopped writing. I stopped visiting. I told myself you weren't my brother anymore. I let you rot in prison for 3 years because I was too hurt to think clearly. We can't change the past, but we can decide what happens next." Maria squeezed his hand. "What do you want to happen next?" "I want Reeves to pay for what he did. To me, to my dogs, to everyone he's hurt. The federal investigation might not be enough. Reeves is connected, protected. He knows how to cover his tracks. So what are you going to do?" Ethan's expression hardened. "Whatever I have to." The call came 3 days later. Agent Chen's voice was tight controlled, just carrying news that she didn't want to deliver. Reeves is gone. Ethan felt the words like a punch to the gut. What do you mean, gone? He resigned his commission 2 days ago, cited health reasons. By the time our people moved to interview him, he'd already left the country. Where? We're not sure. His passport shows he flew to Mexico, but there's no record of him landing. He could be anywhere by now. So he gets away with it. He destroys my life, steals my dogs, covers up murder, and he just walks away? For now, we've issued alerts, international cooperation requests. But Reeves had 30 years to build escape routes. He's not going to be easy to find. Ethan hung up the phone. He stood in the small Wyoming cabin he'd rented, surrounded by 3 dogs who watched him with worried eyes. They could sense his mood. They'd always been able to sense his mood. Titan pressed against his leg, whimpering softly. "It's okay, boy," Ethan said, though his voice carried no conviction. "We're going to find him, I promise you. We're going to find him and make him pay for everything he did." He'd spent 3 years waiting for justice to find him. Now it was time to go hunting for it instead. The investigation into Ethan's conviction moved faster than anyone expected. Without Reeves to mount a defense, without his political connections to slow the process, the evidence of the frame-up became impossible to ignore. Witnesses recanted. Documents surfaced. The truth emerged piece by piece until the entire structure of lies collapsed under its own weight. 6 weeks after his release from Blackwater, Ethan Cole received official notification that his conviction had been vacated. He was innocent. Legally, officially, completely innocent. The notification came with an apology from the military, a formal acknowledgement of wrongful prosecution, an offer of back pay for his years of unjust imprisonment. Money couldn't give him back what he'd lost, but it could fund what came next. "You're really going to do this," Maria said when he told her his plan. "You're going to hunt him down." "Reeves took everything from me, my career, my freedom, my dogs, my family." Ethan's voice was steady, certain. "He doesn't get to disappear into some tropical paradise and live out his days while I carry the scars of what he did. The authorities will find him, eventually. Maybe, or maybe he has enough money to stay hidden forever. Maybe he has enough connections to make himself invisible." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not willing to take that chance." "So you're going to track a fugitive across international borders with 3 dogs and no backup. I'm going to use everything I learned in 12 years of military service to find a man who made the mistake of thinking he could destroy me and walk away." Ethan smiled grimly. "And yes, I'm bringing my dogs. They're very good at finding people who don't want to be found." Maria stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "What's this? $20,000, my savings, every penny I've managed to put aside since Mom died." "Maria, I can't." "You can and you will." She pressed the envelope into his hands. "Find him, Ethan. Find him and make him answer for what he did. For you, for the dogs, for Mom." Ethan took the envelope, held it against his chest. "I will, I promise." The trail started in Tijuana. Ethan had contacts from his military days. People who operated in the gray spaces between legal and illegal, who knew how to find information that official channels couldn't access. One of those contacts was a former intelligence officer named Jack Brennan, who'd retired to run a fishing charter business that was mostly a cover for his actual occupation. "Reeves came through here about 6 weeks ago," Brennan said over drinks at a bar that smelled like salt and old secrets. "Paid cash for a boat. Captain named Rodriguez runs cargo between here and Guatemala." "Where exactly in Guatemala?" "Small town called El Naranjo, near the Mexican border. Good place to disappear if you have money and don't ask questions." "And if I want to find him," Brennan laughed, "you'd need someone who knows the area, someone who can move through jungle without getting killed by cartels, bandits, or the local wildlife." "You know someone like that." "Maybe." Brennan studied him carefully. "But this is dangerous territory, Cole. Reeves isn't just hiding. He's connected to people down there. Drug money, weapons money, the kind of money that buys protection. So he's armed and protected in hostile territory. That's about the size of it." Ethan finished his drink and stood up. "Thanks for the information, Jack. I owe you one." "You owe me more than one, but I'll settle for an update when you find the bastard." Brennan raised his glass. "Good luck, soldier. You're going to need it." Ethan walked out of the bar and into the Tijuana night. Titan, Ghost, and Shadow were waiting in the rented Jeep, their eyes alert, their bodies tense with anticipation. "We've got a location," Ethan told them. "Guatemala, a town called El Naranjo." Titan's ears perked forward. I know, it's going to be dangerous, but we've faced worse together. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The hunt was on. The border crossing into Guatemala took 18 hours of bribes, false paperwork, and creative explanations about why an American was traveling with 3 Belgian Malinois. Ethan paid what needed to be paid, smiled at officials who didn't smile back, answered questions with lies that sounded more convincing than the truth. By the time he reached the outskirts of El Naranjo, the sun was setting and his patience was running thin. The town was exactly what Brennan had described. A forgotten place where forgotten people came to disappear. Dirt roads. Buildings that leaned against each other for support. Eyes that watched strangers with suspicion hardened by decades of violence. Ethan found a cantina on the main road and ordered food he didn't intend to eat. Looking for someone, he told the bartender, a heavy-set man with a scar that ran from his left eye to his chin. American, retired military, came through here about 2 months ago. The bartender's expression didn't change. Lot of Americans come through here. This one had money, lot of money. Probably bought protection from whoever runs things around here. You a cop? No. Bounty hunter. Something like that. The bartender studied him for a long moment. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The American you're looking for. He's not here anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. Where did he go? Deeper into the jungle. Place called La Esperanza, private compound. Very secure. The bartender glanced around nervously. Very dangerous. How dangerous? The kind of dangerous that makes bodies disappear. The kind that makes questions get people killed. Ethan slid a $100 bill across the counter. I'll take my chances. How do I get there? The bartender pocketed the money. There's a man named Carlos. Lives on the edge of town. He knows the jungle, knows the routes, knows how to avoid the patrols. Patrols? The compound has security. Former soldiers. Cartel connections. They don't like visitors. I'm not planning to knock on the front door. The bartender laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Neither did the last man who went looking. They sent him back in pieces. Ethan stood up, leaving his untouched food on the counter. Thanks for the warning. It wasn't a warning, it was a fact. The bartender's eyes followed him to the door. Good luck, gringo. You're going to need it. Carlos lived in a shack that looked like a strong wind would knock it over. He was smaller than Ethan expected. Wiry, weathered, with eyes that had seen things no person should have to see. When Ethan approached his door, he was already waiting with a machete in one hand and a suspicious expression on his face. The bartender sent me, Ethan said. I need a guide to La Esperanza. Carlos laughed. Then the bartender wants you dead. Maybe, but I'm paying cash. How much? By 5,000 American. Half now, half when we get there. Carlos's eyes widened slightly. 5,000 was more money than he'd see in 2 years of honest work. What's at La Esperanza that's worth dying for? A man who took something from me. I'm taking it back. Taking what? Ethan looked at his dogs who sat alert and watchful beside the jeep. 3 years of my life. And a debt that needs to be paid. Carlos considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. We leave at dawn. The jungle is too dangerous at night. How long to reach the compound? 3 days if we move fast, 4 if we hit trouble. What kind of trouble? Carlos smiled, but his eyes stayed hard. The kind that carries automatic weapons and doesn't ask questions. They left at 5:47 a.m. the next morning. The jungle swallowed them within an hour, green closing in from every direction until the sky was nothing but fragments visible through the canopy. Carlos moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent his entire life navigating terrain that killed outsiders. Ethan followed his dogs, ranging ahead, their training kicking in without conscious command. They moved like ghosts, sensing danger before it appeared, alerting him to threats he couldn't see. Your dogs are military, Hanu, Carlos observed on the first night, watching Ghost and Shadow patrol the perimeter of their camp. 12 years of training, 3 combat deployments. And the man you're hunting, he's military too. Was. He's a criminal now. What did he do? Ethan stared into the small fire they'd risked building. He destroyed everything I cared about. My career, my freedom, my dogs. He paused. He killed my mother. Carlos said nothing for a while, then, and you're going to kill him? I'm going to bring him to justice. Justice? Carlos laughed softly. There is no justice in the jungle, my friend. There is only survival. The first sign of trouble came on day 2. Titan stopped suddenly, his entire body going rigid, his ears flattened. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ethan dropped to one knee, scanning the jungle around them. He couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but he trusted his dog's instincts more than his own senses. "What is it?" Carlos whispered. "Patrol, ahead of us." "How do you know?" "He knows?" Ethan pointed at Titan, "and he's never wrong." They waited in silence for 12 minutes. Ethan counted every second, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The gun he'd acquired in Tijuana, pressed against his back, loaded and ready. Then voices drifted through the trees. Spanish spoken casually, the conversation of men who weren't expecting trouble. Two figures emerged from the foliage about 50 yards away, armed with rifles, wearing the kind of tactical gear that spoke of professional training. Ethan held his breath. The patrol passed without seeing them. Their footsteps faded into the jungle. The danger passed. "We need to move," Carlos said. "They'll circle back in an hour." They moved. The compound appeared on day 3. It sat in a clearing carved from the jungle, surrounded by fencing and watchtowers that would have looked appropriate on a military base. Guards patrolled in regular intervals. Cameras swept the perimeter. The entire setup screamed money and paranoia in equal measure. "La Esperanza," Carlos said, crouching beside Ethan on a ridge overlooking the compound. "The American is inside." "How many guards?" 20, maybe more. All former military. Colombian mostly, but some Mexicans. They rotate in 12-hour shifts. Patrol patterns? Every 15 minutes at the perimeter, every 30 at the interior. Ethan studied the compound, his mind mapping routes and calculating odds. 20 guards was a lot, more than he'd hoped for, but not impossible. When's the best time to move? Shift change, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. 5 minutes of confusion while the new guards orient themselves. Ethan checked his watch. 4:23 p.m., less than 2 hours. Tell me about the interior layout. Carlos pulled out a piece of paper, hand-drawn lines showing the compound's structure. Main building in the center, that's where your American lives. Personal quarters on the 2nd floor, office on the 1st. 2 guards at all times outside his door. Only way in, front door or 2nd floor window. Both are covered by cameras and guards. Ethan looked at his dogs. What about the back? Any blind spots? 1, behind the generator building. Camera has a dead zone about 10 meters wide. You'd have maybe 30 seconds before someone notices movement. 30 seconds. It would have to be enough. I need you to create a distraction, Ethan said. Something that draws attention to the front gate. What kind of distraction? The loud kind. Something that makes guards leave their posts. Carlos's eyes narrowed. That's dangerous for me. That's why I'm paying you $5,000. A long pause. Then Carlos nodded. I have contacts in town, men who owe me favors. We can create enough chaos to give you maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes is all I need. The sun set at 5:52 p.m. At 5:58, Ethan positioned himself at the edge of the compound's perimeter, his dogs pressed low against the jungle floor. The shift change was beginning. Guards were moving, communicating, adjusting to new positions. Controlled chaos, exactly what he needed. At 6:03, an explosion echoed from the direction of the front gate. Not a big explosion, just enough to demand attention. Car alarm, gunshots, shouting. Guards at the perimeter turned toward the noise. Radios crackled with confused transmissions. The organized security dissolved into reactive scrambling. Ethan moved. He hit the fence at the dead zone Carlos had identified. Cut through the wire in 4 seconds. Slipped inside, one with Titan Ghost and Shadow moving like shadows at his side. The generator building provided cover. He pressed against its wall, listening to the chaos at the front gate, waiting for his window. It came at 6:07. The guards at the main building's rear entrance had been called to assist with the front gate situation. For approximately 45 seconds, the back door was unprotected. Ethan crossed the open ground in a sprint. His dogs matched his pace, their movement silent and precise. The door was locked, but the lock was civilian-grade, designed to keep out thieves, not trained operatives. He was inside in 12 seconds. The main building was dark. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the walls. Somewhere above him he could hear footsteps. Movement. Confusion. Titan. Track. The massive dog's nose dropped to the ground. 3 years of separation hadn't diminished his abilities. Within seconds, he had a scent. He moved toward the stairs, Ethan following Ghost and Shadow covering their rear. The 2nd floor was a hallway with 4 doors. Titan led him to the one at the end. His tail went rigid. His growl deepened to something primal. Someone was behind that door. Ethan tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, raised his boot, and kicked. The door exploded inward. And there, standing in the middle of a room filled with luxury that had no place in the jungle, was Colonel Thomas Reeves. He looked older than Ethan remembered. Thinner. His hair had gone gray and his face carried the haggard look of a man who hadn't slept well in months. But his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator caught in a trap. "Cole," Reeves's voice was steady despite the circumstances. "I wondered when you'd find me. It took a while. You covered your tracks well. Not well enough, apparently." Titan was growling continuously now, his body coiled for attack. Ghost and Shadow had spread out, blocking any escape route. 3 military working dogs trained for exactly this kind of confrontation, facing the man who'd condemned them to 11 years of torture. "You know what they want to do to you," Ethan said. "They remember everything. Every day of starvation, every beating, every time Castellano used them to murder someone. Those weren't my choices. I sold them. What happened after that was out of my hands." "You sold military working dogs to a criminal organization. You knew exactly what would happen to them." Reeves shrugged. "They were assets. I needed money. The equation was simple." "Simple?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You stole 3 years of my life because I discovered your theft ring. You destroyed my career, my family, my reputation. You let my mother die thinking her son was a criminal. Your mother was old and sick. She would have died anyway." Ethan moved before conscious thought could stop him. His fist connected with Reeves's jaw, spinning the older man around and dropping him to his knees. Before Reeves could recover, Ethan grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You don't get to talk about her. You don't get to speak her name." Reeves's lip was bleeding, but he was smiling. "What are you going to do, Cole? Kill me? You're not a murderer." "Maybe I've changed." "No, you haven't. That's why you're here, instead of somewhere comfortable living out your days with your precious dogs." Reeves's smile widened. "You need justice. You need to see me in handcuffs. You need the system to validate your suffering. What I need is for you to pay for what you've done. And I will, eventually, in some comfortable federal prison where I'll serve maybe 10 years before they let me out on good behavior." Reeves laughed. "That's what justice looks like, Cole. That's what all your righteousness buys you. A decade of inconvenience for me while you carry the scars forever." Titan's growl intensified. The massive dog took a step closer, his eyes locked on the man who had been responsible for years of his suffering. "You know what's funny?" Reeves continued. "Those dogs could kill me right now. One word from you and they'd tear me apart. The evidence would disappear. Nobody would ever know what really happened. You could walk out of here and claim self-defense." "You're trying to manipulate me." "I'm stating facts. You want justice. This is the only justice that matters. The jungle justice. The kind where debts get paid in blood." Ethan looked at Titan, at Ghost and Shadow. 3 animals who had every right to want this man dead. 3 partners who had suffered because of his greed. He could do it. 1 command. Less than a second. And Reeves would be gone forever. "No, The word came out quiet but firm. "What?" "You don't get to choose how this ends." "P.A." Ethan released his grip on Reeves's collar, stepping back. "You don't get to manipulate me into becoming what you are." "Then what are you going to do?" Ethan pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call Agent Chen. I'm going to give her the coordinates of this compound, and you're going to sit here with 3 military working dogs watching you until federal agents arrive to take you into custody." "That could take days." "Then we'll wait days." Reeves's smile finally faded. "You're making a mistake, Cole. I have resources, connections, lawyers who can drag this out for years." "Maybe, but every day you spend fighting this is a day you spend in a cell. Every appeal you file is another hearing where the evidence against you gets stronger. Every connection you try to leverage is another person who has to decide if you're worth protecting." Ethan knelt down, bringing his face level with Reeves's. "You're going to spend the rest of your life paying for what you did. Not in blood. In time. In reputation. In everything you built turning to ash around you." He stood up and walked toward the door. "Titan, guard." The massive dog positioned himself between Reeves and the only exit, his eyes never leaving the prisoner. "Ghost, Shadow, watch." The other 2 dogs took flanking positions, creating a triangle of teeth and muscle that even the bravest man wouldn't challenge. "Wait." Reeves's voice had lost its confidence. "Cole, wait." Ethan paused at the door. "You can't leave me here with them. You said yourself they remember everything. What if they attack? They won't attack unless you try to run or fight. Military training. They're professionals. But what if they lose control? What if the trauma takes over? Ethan looked at his dogs. At the discipline they maintained despite years of abuse. At the loyalty they'd never lost despite everything that had been done to them. They won't lose control. They're better than you. They're better than most people I've ever known. He opened the door. Sit tight, Colonel. Help is on the way. He walked out, leaving Reeves alone with 3 dogs who had every reason to want him dead and every training not to act on that desire. The call to Agent Chen took 47 seconds. Cole, where the hell are you? Guatemala, a compound called La Esperanza, about 60 miles northwest of El Naranjo. Guatemala? What are you doing in Guatemala? I found Reeves. Silence on the line. Then, you found him where? I'm standing in his compound. He's under guard. 3 military working dogs making sure he doesn't go anywhere. You left him alone with the dogs. They're trained. They won't hurt him unless he does something stupid. Chen's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and what might have been admiration. You tracked a fugitive across international borders, infiltrated a secured compound, and apprehended him single-handedly. I had help. My dogs. A local guide. Some creative distraction at the front gate. Are you hurt? No. Is Reeves hurt? He has a split lip. He'll live. Cole, do you understand the legal complications of what you've just done, operating on foreign soil, unlawful detention international? I understand that the man who destroyed my life is sitting in a room surrounded by dogs while we have this conversation. I understand that you now have coordinates where you can send a team to collect him, and I understand that every second we spend talking about legal complications is a second he could be planning an escape. Chen sighed heavily. Stay where you are. Don't let anyone in or out. I'm making calls. How long? 24 hours, maybe less if I can get the right people on board. I'll be here. The night that followed was the longest of Ethan's life. He positioned himself in the hallway outside Reeves's room, listening to the sounds of the compound settling around him. The distraction at the front gate had ended. Guards were returning to their posts, but they hadn't discovered the breach yet. They would. Eventually. At 3:17 a.m., footsteps approached from the stairwell. Ethan pressed against the wall, knife in hand. Shadow's ears perked forward. Ghost moved silently toward the sound. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Armed. Alert. One of Reeves's guards doing a security sweep. The guard saw Ethan at the same moment Ethan saw him. For one heartbeat, neither moved. Then Ghost was there, 75 pounds of muscle and training hitting the guard from the side. The man's rifle clattered to the floor. His scream was cut short as Ghost's jaws closed around his arm, not biting, just holding, controlling. Ethan was on him before he could recover. Quiet. Don't move. Don't make a sound. The guard's eyes were wide with terror. Ghost's grip tightened slightly, eliciting a whimper. I'm going to tie you up now. If you fight, the dog will hurt you. If you scream, the dog will hurt you. Not if you understand. The guard nodded frantically. Ethan used the man's own belt and bootlaces to secure him, gagged him with his own shirt, dragged him into an empty room, and closed the door. Ghost, good boy, release. The dog let go, backing away, his eyes still fixed on the prisoner. 1 guard down, 19 to go? Maybe. The next 4 hours were an exercise in controlled tension. 2 more guards came. 2 more guards were subdued with the help of dogs who performed exactly as they'd been trained. Each confrontation carried the risk of discovery, each successful capture bought more time. By 6:00 a.m., Ethan had 3 prisoners and still hadn't been detected. But his luck was running out. Shift change was coming. Missing guards would be noticed. The compound would go into lockdown. He needed extraction. Now. At 6:23 a.m., his phone buzzed. Cole, you still there? Chen's voice was strained. Tired, carrying the weight of a night spent making impossible arrangements. Still here, but things are getting complicated. How complicated? 3 guards subdued, Reeves still contained, but the compound is about to figure out something's wrong. We have a team inbound. Helicopter from the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City. ETA 40 minutes. 40 minutes might be too long. It's the best I could do. Keep your head down and try not to start a war. She hung up. 40 minutes. Ethan looked at his dogs, at the compound around him, at the impossible math of surviving until help arrived. Titan, Ghost, Shadow. He kept his voice calm, steady. We hold. Whatever happens, we hold. The alarm went off at 6:31 a.m. Someone had found one of the subdued guards, or noticed the missing patrol reports, or discovered the cut fence at the perimeter, It didn't matter how. What mattered was that the compound was now awake and hunting. Ethan moved Reeves to a more defensible position, a storage room with one entrance and solid walls. The colonel didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him when he realized escape was impossible. "They'll kill you," Reeves said as Ethan barricaded the door. "My guards. They're not the type to ask questions." "Then they'll have to go through my dogs first." 3 dogs against 20 armed men. 3 military working dogs against 20 mercenaries who've never faced opponents like them. Ethan finished the barricade and turned to face his prisoner. "I like my odds." The first attack came at 6:47 a.m. 2 guards approached the storage room, door rifles raised voices shouting commands in Spanish. They didn't expect the door to burst open. They didn't expect 80 pounds of muscle and teeth to hit them before they could react. Titan and Ghost worked as a unit exactly as they'd been trained. Disable? Disarm. Control. The guards went down in seconds. Their weapons scattered. Their screams cut short by jaws that could crush bone but chose precision instead. Ethan collected the rifles. 2 more for the arsenal. "Fall back, good boys." The dogs retreated into the storage room. The door closed. The barricade went back up. Round 1 to the home team. The second attack came at 6:59 a.m. with more force. 4 guards this time. Coordinated approach, covering fire. Bullets punched through the storage room door. Splinters flew. Ethan pressed against the wall, Reeves cowering behind a stack of crates. "Titan hold!" The massive dog was straining to attack, every instinct screaming at him to protect his handler. But he held. Training trumped instinct. The gunfire paused. Someone was reloading. Ethan burst through what remained of the door rifle up, already firing. 2 guards dropped. The other 2 scattered for cover. Shadow was already moving flanking, using the chaos to close distance. She hit the 3rd guard from behind, dragging him down. Down her jaws, finding his weapon arm and refusing to let go. Ghost circled to cut off the 4th guard's retreat. In less than 30 seconds, 4 more men were down, but Ethan had taken a bullet. His left arm burned where the round had grazed him. Blood soaked through his sleeve. Not fatal, but painful. Distracting. Shadow, Ghost, return. The dogs disengaged, moving back to defensive positions. Ethan grabbed one of the fallen guards' radios, listening to the panicked transmissions. 12 guards left, maybe less. They were scared now. They'd expected an easy cleanup. They'd found something else entirely. At 7:08 a.m., the helicopter appeared on the horizon. Ethan heard it before he saw it. The distinctive thump of rotor blades cutting through morning air. American military. Chen had pulled strings. The remaining guards heard it too. Radio traffic exploded with confused orders. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to run. Some wanted to negotiate. None of them wanted to face federal agents with witnesses to their crimes. By the time the helicopter touched down at 7:19 a.m., most of the guards had disappeared into the jungle. The few who remained surrendered without resistance. Agent Chen was first off the aircraft. She took one look at Ethan, at the blood on his arm, at the dog standing guard over a shell-shocked Colonel Reeves, and shook her head slowly. "You're insane. You know that. I've been told. You could have died. This could have gone wrong in 100 different ways. But it didn't." Chen gestured to the medical team that followed her off the helicopter. "Get him patched up, and secure the prisoner." 2 agents moved past Ethan to collect Reeves. The colonel didn't resist. He walked between them with the defeated shuffle of a man who'd finally run out of options. As he passed Ethan, he paused. "This isn't over, Cole. I have lawyers, connections. This will take years to sort out." Ethan looked at him, at the man who'd stolen 3 years of his life, at the architect of his suffering and the suffering of 3 loyal dogs. "Take all the years you want," Ethan said quietly. "I've got time. My dogs have time. And every day you spend fighting is a day you spend remembering what you did." Reeves said nothing more. The agents led him away. Chen approached, watching the prisoner disappear into the helicopter. "You did something nobody else could do, Cole. You tracked a fugitive that our best people couldn't find. You apprehended him with minimal casualties. You brought him to justice." "Justice." Ethan tasted the word. "Is that what this is?" "It's the beginning of justice. The rest happens in courtrooms, in testimony, in the slow grinding of a system that doesn't always work but sometimes does. Will it be enough? I don't know." Chen met his eyes. "Will it be enough for you?" Ethan looked at his dogs. At Titan, who pressed against his leg despite the chaos around them. At Ghost and Shadow, who watched everything with the alert professionalism of soldiers who'd completed their mission. 3 partners, 3 survivors, 3 reasons he'd fought this far. "It'll have to be," he said finally, "because this is what we've got." The helicopter lifted off at 7:43 a.m. carrying Colonel Thomas Reeves toward a reckoning that had been 3 years in coming. Ethan watched it go, his dogs beside him, his arm throbbing, his body exhausted, but his mind finally at peace. He'd done what he'd set out to do. He'd found his dogs. He'd cleared his name. He'd brought the man responsible for his suffering to face judgment. Now it was time to go home. Wherever home was. The flight back to American soil took 11 hours. Ethan spent most of it staring out the window, watching clouds pass beneath the aircraft while his dogs slept at his feet. The adrenaline had faded, the mission was complete, and in its place a strange emptiness had settled into his chest. He'd spent 3 years fighting for this moment, dreaming of it, planning for it. Now that it had arrived, he wasn't sure what came next. Agent Chen sat across from him reviewing documents on her laptop. "The preliminary charges against Reeves are being filed as we speak," she said without looking up. "Theft of government property, conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to murder, international flight to avoid prosecution." "How long before trial?" 6 months, maybe 8. His lawyers are already filing motions to delay. "And what happens to him in the meantime?" "Federal detention, no bail. Judge took one look at his escape to Guatemala and decided he was too much of a flight risk." Ethan nodded slowly. 6 months, maybe 8. After 3 years, it seemed like nothing, and everything. "What about me?" Chen finally looked up from her laptop. "What about you? My legal status, my freedom. Am I still a cooperating witness, or am I something else now?" "You're a free man, Cole. Your conviction was vacated. Your record is being expunged. As far as the United States government is concerned, you never committed any crime. That's simple. Nothing about this is simple, but the result is." She closed her laptop. "You're free. You can go wherever you want. Do whatever you want. Start over." Start over. The words echoed in Ethan's mind as the plane descended toward Montana. What did starting over even look like after everything he'd been through? Maria was waiting at the airport. Ethan saw her before she saw him standing near the arrivals gate with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. She looked tired, worried, like she hadn't slept since he'd left for Guatemala. When their eyes met, she froze. Then she was running toward him, pushing through the crowd, her arms wrapping around him before he could speak. "You idiot," she sobbed into his shoulder. "You absolute idiot. You could have died down there." "I'm okay, Maria. I'm okay." "You tracked a fugitive through the jungle with 3 dogs and no backup. That's not okay. That's insane. It worked. It could have gotten you killed." She pulled back, her hands gripping his shoulders, her eyes searching his face. Promise me you'll never do anything like that again." "I promise." "You're lying." "Probably." Maria laughed despite herself, with tears still streaming down her face. "I hate you. I love you. I don't know what I feel right now." "That's fair." She noticed his arm for the first time, the bandage visible beneath his sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." Graze wound, already healing. "A graze wound? From a bullet? That was shot at you?" Maria shook her head. "This is my life now, having a brother who gets shot at and calls it nothing." Titan pressed against Ethan's leg, and Maria's attention shifted to the dogs. "They look better. Healthier than the pictures in the news." "They've been getting proper care, first time in years." Ethan reached down to scratch behind Titan's ears. "They saved my life down there, multiple times." "So I heard. Agent Chen called me while you were in the air, told me everything." Maria's voice softened. "She said you could have killed Reeves, had every opportunity, every justification, but you didn't. Killing him wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have felt good. For about 5 seconds, then I'd have to live with it forever." Ethan met his sister's eyes. "I've seen enough death, Maria. I've caused enough death. I didn't want to add to it." She nodded slowly. "Mom would have been proud." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you had a good heart. Even when I stopped believing it, she never did." The words hit Ethan harder than any bullet. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. "I wish she could have known the truth. Before she died. I wish she could have known I was innocent." "She did know." Maria took his hand. "I found a letter in her things after she passed. She never sent it, but she wrote it. Pages and pages about how she knew you didn't do what they said, how she was praying for the truth to come out. She never said anything to me. She was too sick by then, too confused. But she knew Ethan. In her heart, she always knew. Ethan closed his eyes. Let the grief wash over him. Let himself feel for the first time in years the full weight of everything he'd lost. Then Titan whimpered softly, pressing closer, and the grief became something else. Not pain anymore. Peace. The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in February, 8 months after Ethan had dragged Colonel Thomas Reeves out of a Guatemalan compound. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was packed with spectators, journalists, and officials who wanted to witness the downfall of a man who'd once been one of the military's most respected officers. Ethan sat in the front row, his dogs not allowed inside, but waiting in a nearby vehicle with Maria. He wore a suit for the first time in years, uncomfortable in the formal clothes, uncomfortable with the attention. But this was important. He needed to see it through. Reeves entered the courtroom in chains. He looked diminished. Smaller than he'd seemed in Guatemala. The past 8 months had aged him, stripped away the arrogance that had defined his bearing for decades. Their eyes met across the room. Reeves looked away first. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Witnesses testified to the theft ring Reeves had operated for years. Financial records documented the money he'd stolen. Communications proved his involvement in the frame-up of Ethan Cole. And most damning of all evidence linked him directly to the trafficking of 3 military working dogs to a criminal organization that had used them to murder 9 men. Ethan testified on the 4th day. He spoke for 6 hours detailing his relationship with Titan Ghost and Shadow, describing the moment he'd discovered Reeves's crimes, explaining the frame-up that had cost him 3 years of his life. And he told them about Blackwater, about Castellano, about walking into a canine pen expecting to die and finding his dogs instead. The jury listened in silence. When he finished, several of them were crying. The defense had little to offer. Reeves's lawyers tried to paint him as a decorated officer who'd made mistakes, not a criminal mastermind. They argued that he hadn't known what would happen to the dogs after he sold them. They claimed the frame-up of Ethan Cole had been orchestrated by others. Nobody believed them. On the 12th day, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Journalists rushed for the doors to file their stories. Officials congratulated each other on a successful prosecution. Spectators talked over each other in excited voices. Ethan sat still. He watched Reeves absorb the verdict. Watched the man who'd destroyed his life finally face consequences. Watched justice imperfect and delayed, but real, finally arrive. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything at all. Maria found him outside the courthouse an hour later. He was sitting on a bench, Titan beside him, staring at nothing in particular. Ghost and Shadow lay at his feet, exhausted from the stress of waiting. "It's over," Maria said, sitting down beside him. "He's going to prison for life. Multiple life sentences. He'll never see freedom again." "I know." "You don't look happy." "I don't know how to feel." Ethan scratched behind Titan's ears. "I spent 3 years imagining this moment, dreaming about it. And now that it's here, I just feel empty." "That's normal. It's called closure." "Closure feels overrated." Maria laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just too tired to feel anything right now. You've been running on adrenaline and determination for months. Now that you can finally stop, your body doesn't know what to do." "So what do I do?" "You rest, you heal, you figure out what comes next." "What if I don't know what comes next?" Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled something from her pocket and handed it to him. It was a photograph, a farmhouse surrounded by mountains, trees, open land. "What's this?" "A place, about 2 hours from Bozeman, 20 acres, mostly fenced. Previous owner trained working dogs. There's a barn kennels, plenty of room for 3 Belgian Malinois to run." Ethan stared at the photograph. "You found this?" "I've been looking for weeks, ever since you came back from Guatemala." Maria's voice was gentle. "You need a home, Ethan. You and your dogs. Somewhere you can heal. Somewhere you can build something new. I don't know anything about farming." "Good thing it's not a farm. It's a training facility for dogs." Maria smiled. "The military is always looking for qualified handlers to help rehabilitate traumatized canines. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called me last week. She said if you were interested, there might be a position available." "Hayes called you?" "She called me because she knew you wouldn't answer your phone." Maria took his hand. "You're not alone anymore, Ethan. You have people who want to help, people who believe in you. All you have to do is let them." Ethan looked at the photograph again. A home. A purpose. A chance to help dogs like Titan and Ghost and Shadow dogs who'd been broken by circumstances beyond their control. A chance to turn his suffering into something meaningful. "What do you think, boy?" He showed the photograph to Titan. "Think we could live there?" Titan's tail wagged. That was answer enough. The farm was called Haven Ridge, and it was everything the photograph had promised and more. Ethan moved in 3 weeks after the trial ended. Maria helped him unpack organizing the kitchen while he set up kennels and training equipment. The dogs explored every inch of the property, running through fields, investigating outbuildings, marking their new territory with the enthusiasm of animals who finally had space to breathe. For the first time in years, they looked genuinely happy. So did Ethan. The work with the military canine rehabilitation program began 2 months later. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes sent him his first case, a Belgian Malinois named Ranger, who'd been traumatized by an IED explosion in Syria. The dog was aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous to anyone who approached him. The military had been ready to euthanize him. Ethan asked for a chance instead. It took 6 weeks of patient, consistent work. Hours spent in Ranger's space, not touching, not threatening, just being present. Gradual exposure to the triggers that set him off. Careful rebuilding of trust that had been shattered by violence. On the 43rd day, Ranger approached Ethan voluntarily for the first time. On the 57th day, he allowed physical contact. On the 75th day, he was running through fields with Titan, Ghost, and Shadow, playing like he'd never known trauma at all. The military sent more dogs. Then the VA started calling, asking if Ethan could help veterans who were struggling to connect with service animals. Then other organizations reached out. Rescue groups, training facilities, people who'd heard about the man who'd tracked a fugitive through the jungle with 3 dogs and wanted his expertise. Haven Ridge became more than a home. It became a mission. 1 year after the trial, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. Agent Chen's black SUV rolled up the long driveway at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan was in the middle of a training session with a German shepherd named Duke who'd been rescued from an abusive breeder. He left Duke in the capable supervision of his assistant, a young veteran named Marcus, who'd found purpose at Haven Ridge after struggling with civilian life and walked to meet Chen at her vehicle. "Agent Chen, this is a surprise?" "A good one, I hope." She stepped out of the SUV looking around at the property with an expression of genuine appreciation. "You've built something impressive here, Cole." "I had help." "Don't be modest. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes shows me your progress reports. What you're doing with these animals, it's remarkable." Ethan shrugged. "They deserve a chance. Someone has to give it to them." Speaking of chances, Chen reached into her vehicle and pulled out a folder. "I have something for you. For you. Consider it a belated gift." "What kind of gift wouldn't the official kind?" She handed him the folder. "Colonel Reeves died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack in his cell. The appeals he was filing died with him." Ethan opened the folder. Inside was a formal notice from the Department of Defense confirming that all charges against him had been permanently dismissed, all records had been expunged, and a full restoration of his military honors had been approved. "You're officially a decorated veteran again," Chen said, "with full back pay for the years you were wrongfully imprisoned. It's a substantial amount." Ethan stared at the documents. 3 years of his life reduced to paperwork and compensation. "It doesn't bring back what I lost." "No, it doesn't." Chen's voice was softer than usual. "But maybe it helps you build what comes next." "Maybe." She looked around the property again at the dogs running in the distance, at the buildings filled with animals being given second chances. "You know what I see here, Cole?" "What?" "Purpose, meaning, the kind of life that most people spend their whole existence searching for." Chen met his eyes. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that helps others. That's rare. That's valuable. That's the definition of moving forward." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't good at accepting compliments. Titan appeared at his side, pressing against his leg, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. "I have another piece of news," Chen continued. "Less official, but you might find it interesting." "What news?" "Thompson, Marcus Thompson, Castellano's former enforcer. He finished his sentence 2 weeks ago. Reduced time for cooperation." Ethan's jaw tightened. And he asked me to pass along a message. He wanted you to know that he's been sober for 8 months. He's enrolled in a job training program. He's trying to change." "Why would he tell me that?" "Because apparently watching you in that canine pen changed something in him. He said seeing those dogs obey you, seeing the difference between real strength and what he'd been calling strength, it made him question everything he thought he knew." Ethan considered this. Thompson had been a brutal man, complicit in terrible crimes. But he'd also been the first to break from Castellano's control, the first to provide evidence that brought down the Empire. "Tell him good luck," Ethan said finally, "and tell him that change is possible. I'm living proof of that." Chen smiled. "I'll pass it along." She got back in her SUV, then paused before closing the door. "One more thing, Cole. Off the record?" "What?" "Thank you for everything you did, for not giving up when the system failed you, for hunting Reeves when the rest of us couldn't find him, for bringing justice to men who thought they were untouchable. I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know. That's why the gratitude matters." She drove away, leaving Ethan standing in the driveway with documents that represented the official end of a nightmare. He looked at Titan, at the property around him, at the life he'd built from the ashes of everything he'd lost. "What do you think, boy? Is it over?" Titan's tail wagged once. His eyes held the same steadiness they'd always held. Over, maybe not over. Maybe there was no over. Maybe there was just forward one day at a time, one step at a time, one dog at a time. But that was enough. That was more than enough. Maria visited every Sunday for dinner. She'd bring groceries and stories from her work at the hospital, where she'd recently been promoted to head nurse. Ethan would cook while she played with whatever dogs were currently in residence at Haven Ridge. Tonight, she was throwing a tennis ball for a young Malinois named Scout who'd been rescued from a dogfighting ring. "He's getting better," she observed, as Scout returned the ball with enthusiasm. 2 weeks ago, he wouldn't even make eye contact. "He's a fighter, in the good way." Ethan stirred the pot on the stove. "His new family is coming next weekend. Veteran couple from Idaho. They lost their previous service dog to cancer and have been looking for another partner." "You're sure he's ready?" "He's ready. They're ready. It's a good match." Maria threw the ball again, watching Scout race after it with pure joy. "You've saved so many of them," she said quietly. "Dogs who would have been euthanized. Dogs nobody else wanted. How many is it now?" 47 successful placements. 12 more currently in rehabilitation." 47? Maria shook her head in wonder. "That's 47 families who have partners they wouldn't have had otherwise. 47 veterans who have support animals. 47 lives changed because you refused to give up. The dogs do most of the work. I just provide the space." "Don't minimize what you've accomplished." Maria caught Scout as he returned with the ball hugging him close. "You turned this place into something incredible, something that matters. I had good teachers." Ethan nodded toward Titan Ghost and Shadow, who were dozing on the porch. "They taught me everything I know about resilience." "They taught you more than that." "What do you mean?" Maria set Scout down and walked toward the kitchen. "They taught you that love doesn't break, that loyalty survives anything, that even after the worst circumstances imaginable connection is possible." She stopped beside him, looking at the 3 dogs on the porch. "When you walked into that pen at Blackwater, you didn't know if they'd remember you. You didn't know if the trauma had destroyed the bond you'd built. You just trusted. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice. You could have given up. You could have accepted that the dogs you loved were gone forever. Instead, you walked into a pen with 3 starving military dogs and trusted that love would be stronger than fear." Ethan turned off the stove, stood in silence for a moment. "I couldn't let them go," he said finally. "Not without trying. They saved my life too many times. They trusted me through things that would have broken most partnerships. I owed them at least the chance to remember. And they did remember. They did." Maria hugged him, a real hug, the kind that carried years of separation and reconciliation in its warmth. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I should have said that years ago. I should have believed in you when everyone else didn't. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the man you are, the life you've built, the difference you make." "Thank you, Maria." "And Mom would be proud too. Wherever she is, she's watching. She knows the truth now, and she's proud." Ethan held his sister close. The past couldn't be changed. The years couldn't be returned. The suffering couldn't be erased. But it could be transformed. It could become something beautiful. The sun set over Haven Ridge as they finished dinner, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ethan sat on the porch with his 3 dogs, Maria beside him, watching the light fade over mountains that had become home. 2 years ago, he'd walked out of Blackwater Federal Correctional expecting to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Now he was free. His name was cleared. His dogs were healthy and happy. His sister was back in his life. And every day he had the chance to help animals who'd been broken by circumstances beyond their control. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was better. Titan raised his head from Ethan's lap, his ears perking forward. A moment later, headlights appeared on the driveway. A pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of the house. A young woman stepped out, maybe early 20s, with the careful movements of someone who'd seen trauma and was still learning to trust. Beside her on a leash was a German shepherd who moved with the same caution. "Mr. Cole," the woman called. "I'm Sarah. We spoke on the phone. About Duke." Duke. The German shepherd Ethan had been training for the past 3 months, ready now for placement with the right handler. "Come on up," Ethan called back. "Let's see if you two are a good fit." Sarah approached the porch slowly, her dog matching her pace. When she reached the steps, Duke's ears perked forward. His tail began to wag. Sarah knelt beside him, her hand finding his head, her voice soft with wonder. "He likes you," Ethan said. "That's a good sign." "I haven't had a dog since I got back from Afghanistan. I wasn't sure I could." "Why not?" "Because the last one I had, my service dog, he died protecting me from an ambush. I didn't think I deserved another partner." Ethan looked at Titan, at Ghost and Shadow, at the 3 dogs who had survived things that should have killed them and never stopped being loyal. "Let me tell you something about dogs," he said. "They don't care about what you deserve. They care about who you are. They see something in you that maybe you can't see in yourself, and they decide to love you anyway." Sarah looked up at him, tears forming in her eyes. "How do you know that? Because 3 years ago, I walked into a pen with 3 dogs I thought would kill me. They hadn't been fed in days. They'd been tortured for years. Every reason said they should have torn me apart." He gestured toward Titan, who had risen and was watching the newcomers with alert interest. "But they didn't, because they remembered who I was, because the bond we'd built was stronger than anything anyone had done to them." Sarah stroked Duke's fur, her expression shifting from uncertainty to something that looked like hope. "You think Duke and I could have that kind of bond? I think you already do. You just have to trust it." Duke pressed closer to Sarah, his tail wagging faster. She laughed, the first genuine laugh Ethan had heard from her. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's try this." Ethan watched them walk toward the training area, Duke matching Sarah's pace perfectly, their movements already beginning to synchronize. Another dog saved, another veteran helped, another life changed. This was his purpose now. Not revenge, not anger, not the bitterness that had consumed him for 3 years. Just this. Dogs who needed second chances, humans who needed partners, bonds that could be rebuilt even after they'd been shattered. Maria appeared beside him, then watching Sarah and Duke disappear around the corner of the barn. "Another one?" she asked. "Another one? You're going to run out of room eventually." "Then I'll build more. There's always more space. There's always more dogs who need help." Maria shook her head, smiling. "You've changed, you know." "Have I?" "When you first got out of prison, you were angry, focused on revenge. Everything was about making Reeves pay. And now you're focused on something else, something bigger, something that actually matters." Ethan looked out over his property, at the dogs running in the fading light, at the buildings that housed animals in recovery, at the life he'd built from nothing. "I spent 3 years in darkness," he said. "Literal darkness sometimes. Locked in cells, locked in despair, locked in the belief that everything I cared about was gone forever." He paused, finding the words. "And then I found my dogs. They were broken, starving, traumatized. But they still remembered me. They still loved me. After everything they'd been through, they still had the capacity for connection." He turned to face his sister. "That's what I learned, Maria. That's what I try to teach every animal that comes through here. That no matter how dark things get, no matter how broken you feel, the capacity for love doesn't die. It just waits. It waits for someone to give it a chance." Maria wrapped her arm around his shoulders. "Mom always said you had a way with words." "Mom always said a lot of things, most of them about how I needed to clean my room." They both laughed. The sun finished setting, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Titan answered with a bark of his own. Ethan Cole stood on the porch of his home, surrounded by animals he'd saved and family he'd rebuilt, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete. The darkness was behind him now. The anger had transformed into purpose. The pain had become the foundation for something beautiful. He'd walked into a prison pen expecting to die and found his dogs instead. He'd tracked a fugitive through the jungle and brought him to justice. He'd built a sanctuary for broken animals and broken people. And he'd learned the truth that his 3 partners had known all along. That loyalty doesn't die. That love survives the worst circumstances. That even after 3 years of starvation and abuse, a bond built on trust and purpose and genuine connection could not be destroyed. Titan pressed against his leg. Ghost settled at his feet. Shadow watched the property with her intelligent eyes. 3 dogs who had refused to forget their handler. 3 partners who had taught him what real strength looked like. 3 survivors who had turned their suffering into a gift that kept giving every day, every dog, every life they touched together. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not violence, not the destruction of enemies. Just this. Purpose found in pain. Light discovered in darkness. Love rebuilt from ashes. Ethan Cole had spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But standing here now, surrounded by everything he'd built, he understood something that had taken years to learn. Those 3 years hadn't been wasted. They'd been preparation. For this moment. For this life. For this chance to turn suffering into service and pain into purpose and trauma into a sanctuary for others who were still finding their way out of darkness. The night settled over Haven Ridge. The dogs slept peacefully, and somewhere in the quiet in the space between heartbeats, Ethan Cole finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, a purpose, not a building, a bond, not an ending, a beginning. Because the strongest bonds aren't built in comfort. They're forged in fire, tested in darkness, and proven in moments when everything seems lost. And when they survive, when they emerge from the flames still intact, they become unbreakable. Ethan Cole and his dogs had been through fire. They had survived, and now together they were helping others do the same. That was the real victory. That was the only victory that mattered, and it was just getting started.